not just the transaction or the value of the transaction to the agency that's in question here, because what has followed in the report and what's clear from my own observation of the industry is that inevitably what it leads to is purchasing of inventory from the B team. So if you have an A league player, you're going to pay a certain price, a premium for a premium audience. Then you have a B league player who has nominally got lots of people, whatever they are, listen, view, read, whatever the case may be, but they have massive discount structures in place. And where this has happened, you've seen the evolution from buying media space from the A team, buying media space from the B team, which then brings into question the ROI, the real ROI, which is, does your campaign work or not? So how do you balance, Yvonne, the inspection of the media in terms of the value of the purchase made, but offset that against actual in-market response to discover, I mean, how's it playing out in the marketplace? Do you overlay your media spend against market outcomes?
Absolutely. It's one of the things that we're becoming a lot better at. So you'll find that we're starting to do a lot of marketing mix modeling and using econometric modeling to be able to understand the value of investment. So if I invest R1 into my TV versus into outdoor, what is the return on my sales for that? And businesses are becoming a lot more focused on that. And certainly from our perspective, it's being driven at a global level, and in the absence of the right tools and evolution in the African continent, because we know that data is very difficult to gather and actually collate, especially across the East and West African markets. We actually are finding that we're having to try and devise the right models to then try to do a projection to understand this is the investment, this is what we're expecting to get out, and then transfer those results into other markets. It's a very difficult position we find ourselves in, Gordon, and it's not something that we can fix straight away, but it's certainly something that we've realized and we're wanting to really focus on.
So to Chris's earlier point then about, it's not just about the price, it's about the strategic insight. You could conceive of a circumstance where you'd pay a premium for media exposure, provided I, as the planner, could link it to an in-market response.
Absolutely, and I think this boils down back to the point on the fee that Chris was raising, is that the way that the fees are negotiated at the moment, we look at, if you look at the total media spend and you take a good 3.5% of that for your fee, a lot of the time with our organizations and whether it's media procurement are focusing on that 3.5% as opposed to the full pie. And in doing so, if we're relying on you as the media agency to drive that strategic connection point with our consumers so we can get that return, and yet we're squeezing you so much on that 3.5%, it really then takes the shift and focus away from actually getting that ROI to actually focusing on pricing and volume, etc. Then the conversation shifts. And right now, like you're saying, if we're wanting to get that ROI and do the MMM, the marketing mix modeling, we have to rely on them to do the right thing at the right price. So we get the right strategic insights, so we meet our connection and our touch points with our consumers, so we get the value that we're wanting to create.
Well, one of the other things which has been raised here is that the industry or the media industry, media buying industry, then forces executives like Yvonne to spend or to invest in channels where the agency has got equity ownership. That sounds like this thing is, the report says this. The report says this collusion and lack of transparency is systemic, but looks like it's got its own value chain within the industry. I mean, I don't want to ask if that's your experience.
It's a great question. Let me put some context there. Let me quote from the report. It says many senior executives were pressurized into directing media spend to companies in which the agency or agency holding company actually held an equity investment. I mean, that's unspeakable.
And I don't want to say is that your experience, because we're not talking about you media show. Yeah. But I mean, do you find this in, because this report is still overseas, North America, it's not South African yet. In your experience in the South African marketplace, would you say this, I mean, before somebody commissions a report like this, would you say this is something that needs to be nipped in the bud as well?
Absolutely. I think the problem with it is that you become the judge with shares in a prison, right? I would not ever want to stand in a court in front of a judge who's got shares in a prison. Because the moment, trust me, he's going to try and find you guilty because he wants to send you to his prison to make more money out of you, right? So I think it's exactly the same way with media. It would be a horrible situation if I had shares in Billboard Company X and I said, okay, well, my client, I'm incentivized to put your media on Billboard Company X. By the way, I think across the continent, though, it is something that we have noticed. I can't comment on any specifics, but that we have noticed in certain markets across the African continent where it's, again, very open and transparent, that certain agencies own media.
Okay.
So if you want to buy media space on that platform, you have to put your media and creative through that agency. And again, that goes back, that's an open and honest relationship. That's saying, I'm agency X, I own billboard Y. If you want to advertise on billboard Y, you have to book the media through me, you have to put your creative through me. And that's if it's open and honest, that's not what we do in South Africa. But if that's what they do, then so be it.
It must get a bit more complex when you move beyond, when you move into the rest of the continent as well, where particularly you look at a country like Nigeria, where there's a lot of individual owners, of media owners compared to South Africa, but also where you don't have the big media groupings or media agencies. So it must get a bit complex in that environment, isn't it?
It's a pure conflict of interest. That's what it is. I mean, if you are a media owner and you actually own inventory, and then you're expected to be objective in advising your client on what is the best strategy for their business, you can't now start offering this. It's easier for you to sell within the customer base that you have, as opposed to actually going outside and trying to get somebody on board. So it's a pure conflict of interest. And as much as you can try and separate out, have agreements and have the visibility and the transparency, at what point do you ensure that there isn't that influence or that natural leaning towards being able to advise them to your specific media?
Yvonne, let me pose you a question. I mean, one of the saddest observations from my perspective, not these young marketing guys, but from an old guy's perspective here, there's a fundamental disconnect, and I'm quoting from the report, in the relationship between the agency and the client. This used to be a special relationship. It was described as, an intimate relationship. What's gone wrong? What's broken down? Who is responsible? Can I, on behalf of some of the people out there, and in recognition of your previous life as a procurement person, could I suggest that perhaps part of the problem here is that the biggest disconnect is between marketing and procurement?
Yeah, that's a very, very interesting topic, Gordon, because I think if you look at the global environment and the pressure that a lot of companies are facing in terms of return on investment to shareholders, shareholders are demanding a lot more value. So when you look at the profit pressure that people face, it's becoming more and more challenging, and they're starting to focus and hone in on all of the key top spend areas, and media being a big one, and one that hasn't necessarily been unraveled. They've moved to a strategy, and in procurement they've done this in a lot of different categories where they commoditize it. And what you're finding is media is becoming a lot more commoditized, and in doing that they're focusing on a pricing structure and are setting up, we need to hit certain cost per points or cost per thousands, and they're focusing on give us an upfront saving if we spend this much with you. We're finding that organizations are pulling together to actually work at group levels as opposed to individual independent media levels, so you can get that group collective. Now, is that wrong? I don't think so. I think if you're wanting to make sure that you're delivering shareholder value, I agree, but at the same time, it mustn't come at the expense of what marketers are looking for, which is the quality and the insights and the strategic connections that we've been looking for. And that's been the biggest challenge, is you now have big media procurement departments that are coming in and controlling the money side, and large Excel spreadsheets are sent through during the pitch process. You're familiar with this. And it's important to have that transparency and that visibility. However, it's coming, unfortunately, in some instances at the expense of the marketing objectives.
Speaking about procurement media, I think procurement in media is very often made out to be the boogeyman. It's not the case at all, right? Procurement in media, I think, adds a lot of accountability to media. And I think that's where, in my opinion, one of the most important words that we need to add to media is that accountability, right? So I think there is, however, a challenge very often with, so I think once you've got procurement in and you've got this accountability and you've got the checks and balances in place, and you make sure that your relationship with your media agency is open, honest and transparent. I'll give you an example at the media shop, and I always joke about it, but we've got an office that is open to auditors. Literally, we actually had to dedicate office space within our organization just for auditors, because we've got auditors there 24/7, 365. Okay?
From the different,
from all of our different clients.
Is there a point where you begin just to surrender the things that you should be controlling? Because one of the things the report was very clear, and in fact the ubiquity follow-up guidelines was the absence of skills.
Yeah.
So how do we upskill marketing brand managers? How do we upskill agencies? Who's responsible for the upskilling? Because at the end of the day, I can't bring in a third party every time I want to make an intelligent decision. There must be a point where I have to take that decision myself. So how do we fix it? It's you know, how do you go out tomorrow morning and start to fix this?
And yeah, exactly right, Gordon. But I think that's where, let's call it media procurement, is still a relatively new field within procurement, right? I think, and all too often, I think the challenge that happens with procurement is, let's call it unsophisticated procurement, right? So the same guy who buys your screws and buys your nuts and bolts is the guy who buys your media as well, right? And I think that's very often where we have a challenge, where it's about buying cheap media versus the right media.
Yeah.
Okay. And that's why I love the discussion that you had earlier with Yvonne regarding return on investment, econometric modeling. That's where the discussion needs to go to, where you've got a sophisticated procurement person who understands and knows media. And I think that's an incredibly important thing from a marketing and from a media perspective, is that knowledge and understanding of what we as media agencies do.
Chris Botha, I think we're going to have to leave it there. Accountability, transparency, collaboration. Yvonne de Souza, thank you so much for joining us today. We could talk the whole day about this, but I think to me, at the end of the day, it's not so much about somebody imposing rules on you or coming to look at what you're doing. It's really going back to the ethics of the individuals that we hire into the organizations, and just the whole culture that we promote around our agencies. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Chris and Yvonne, thanks very much for joining us. Tough topic, but we appreciate the insights, and look forward to resolving it. That's the big issue, is resolving it.
Well, that's a wrap for the first Marketing, Media and Money show. My name is Thebe Ikalafeng, and I look forward to you joining us on the next show.
And it's Gordon Muller signing off, and looking forward to seeing you on the next CNBC Marketing, Media and Money show, brought to you by CNBC right across the African continent.